Hey everyone, today it's time for another Piano Questions Answered tutorial. And I'm going to look at a question that's come in from YouTube user Smooth Buddha about seventh chords. Bill, what's the theory behind major seventh chords and dominant seventh chords and minor seventh chords? In that when I'm using them in a chord progression, do certain seventh chords work together? I've been playing about with them and I'm not sure about how to mix and match them. For example, I played a chord progression with all major seventh chords, but certain chords sounded kind of wrong or not musically pleasant. Is there a rule for using seventh chords? So what I'm going to do today is go through the main seventh chords and their various functions. Now I've covered quite a bit of this in the past, but sevenths are one of those areas of harmony that confuse relative beginners because the various sevenths, like the major seventh and the dominant seventh and so on, seem on paper like they should be very similar, but actually they're not. They tend to fulfill very different roles, functions, to use the technical term, in a chord progression. Now you'll find all this useful if you're a beginner or a relative beginner when it comes to piano chords. You know, you're just in the process of figuring out how chords and harmony work, or if you want a deeper understanding of how chords relate to each other. What I'm doing here is pretty closely related to some of the stuff that's in the first section of my book, How to Really Play the Piano. So if you've got that or if you're working your way through it, this should help you with your understanding of how seventh chords work in general. Okay, let's get going. Let's start with some basics. Now for today, in the interest of keeping things simple, I'm going to focus on the role of seventh chords in major keys. Now there's a lot of overlap with what they do in minor keys, and it's not that difficult to figure out the differences once you know the major context. But as I say, in the interest of clarity and simplicity, just for today, we're going to stick to talking about things in the context of the major. Now, as you may know, if you watch a lot of my piano tutorials, because I've probably said this a million times, any major key, C major, F major, D sharp major, whatever, has its very own major scale. Here's the scale of F major. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. Okay, and we can continue to run that pattern up and down the piano keyboard, just with those 7 notes in different octaves. Now we can also number those notes. We can talk about the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th degrees of the scale. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, building out from there, we can also create a chord based on every note of that scale, just using this simple triad shape. And that, if we go up the scale and just use the notes of the scale, gives us the chords of F, G minor, A minor, B flat, C, D minor, E diminished, and back to F. Okay, and we can also, as we number the notes, we can also number the chords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and back to 1. Now those chords that occur naturally in the key of F major, the chords that grow out of its scale as it were, are what we call the diatonic chords of that key. And any chord progression in the key of F major will be structured around those chords, and it will mostly, if maybe not exclusively, it will mostly be made up of those diatonic chords of F major. So each major key has a set of diatonic chords. 3 major chords, yeah, built off the 1st, 4th and 5th degrees of the scale. 3 minor chords built off the 2nd, 3rd and 6th degrees of the scale. And 1 lonely little diminished chord all by itself built off the 7th degree of the scale. Let's just do that in C major as well. So here's our C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, back to C, and let's go up the C major chords. C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, and back to C. You'll notice it's the same pattern as in F. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and back to the major, back to the tonic. Now those chords are all in their root positions there. That is with the note the chord is named after at the bottom. Okay, so they're all in their root positions and they're all built up of thirds. Now thirds, as you may know, are a kind of interval. We use intervals to measure the distances between notes on the piano keyboard. So probably the most famous interval is the octave, but we also have the fifth, the perfect fifth there, the perfect fourth, and two types of third, the interval of a major third, like the one between C and E, or the interval of a minor third between E and G. Now you don't have to know the precise structure of those intervals to build those simple chords off the scale, because all you have to do is start with a note of the scale, okay, which is going to be the root note of the chord we're creating, and count 3 notes up the scale, including the one you're starting on. Okay, so if we're in the key of C and we want to create the tonic chord, so called the number 1 chord, the chord of C major, we start on C and we go up 1, 2, 3, which takes us to E. Okay, and then that's our first third, and then we go up starting on the E, 1, 2, 3 notes of the scale again. Okay, and that is our root position triad of the chord of C major. And the same principle works for the other chords of the key. Okay, so the number 3 chord of C major is E minor. Okay, so let's see if we can build that with our thirds. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then from the G again, starting on the note, 1, 2, 3, and there's our chord of E minor. Now the important thing to grasp here is that as well as each major key having its own basic diatonic chords, it also has a set of diatonic seventh chords, a seventh chord for each note of the diatonic, the major scale. So in C major, those diatonic sevenths are C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, and then B half diminished seventh. Okay, diminished sevenths are a little bit complex, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. Now, how am I building those seventh chords? It's really simple, you might even have worked out already. I'm just taking the basic diatonic chord and adding another third up the scale on top of each one. So there's our chord of C major, we've built it up of our thirds. Okay, all I'm doing is going another third up the scale, once again counting from the note I'm starting on. 1, 2, 3, that takes us to a B, and the total chord is C major 7. Okay, starting on G, I can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to create our basic G chord, and then up another third up the C major scale. Okay, to F, and that gives us the chord of G7, or G dominant seventh to give it its full name. Now, obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious if you're really new, but obviously you don't have to play those chords in those shapes, yeah? Once you've created the basic chord of D minor 7, you can head off and play its constituent notes in lots of different voicings and inversions. So all of these chords that I'm playing are all D minor 7, they're all using the notes D, F, A, and C, just in different shapes. Okay, but when we think about the chord in theoretical terms, when we think about it growing out of the C major scale or out of other major scales where it might appear, then we think about it just in its root position, just because it kind of makes things easier. Inversion and voicing is a different subject, kind of off topic for what we're doing today, but you know, do bear that in mind if you're really new. So to get back to Smooth Buddha's question, what do those seventh chords do? What's the point of them, and how do they relate to one another? Now this is where we begin to get onto the subject of chord function. Okay, now if you look at a chord progression in the key of, for example, C major, each of the diatonic chords in that key has the potential to do a particular job, what we call its function. And the functions of chords are involved in starting or finishing the progression, or in keeping it moving along. And there are 3 basic chord functions. The first one is the tonic function, which kind of has a feeling of settlement, of rest, of stability, of being home, if you like. And in a major key, the 3 chords with the tonic function are the number 1 chord, the tonic chord, okay, the strongest tonic function, C in the key of C major, but also the number 3 chord, E minor in the key of C major, and the number 6 chord, A minor in the key of C major. The second function is the subdominant or predominant function. I prefer to use the word predominant because it makes it clearer what it does. In a major key, the number 2 chord, D minor in C major, and the number 4 chord, F in C major, which is also known as the subdominant chord, have that predominant, that subdominant function. And the predominant function is basically transitional. It leads us from a tonic type chord in the direction of a dominant type chord. And dominant type chords are our third function, okay, and they are the chords based on the 5th degree and the 7th degrees of the major scale, and what they want to do is drag us back to the tonic, okay, so dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, okay, that is kind of the basic structure of Western music. If you have a chord progression in a song, in a symphony, whatever, it will tend to go tonic, predominant, dominant, or even just tonic straight to dominant and back again. Yeah, but chord progressions tend to work in that sequence. That's why we call them progressions, because they gradually move along away from the tonic, perhaps through a predominant, to the dominant, out and back again, out and back again. Now what happens if we take our diatonic chords and make them all into sevenths using the technique that I just showed you of going another third up the major scale to find a diatonic seventh note? In terms of function, in terms of what we've just been talking about, nothing really changes. Adding diatonic sevenths to our chords doesn't change the way chords work in a progression. They still do the same job of moving out towards the dominant and back towards the tonic, okay? In one case, the 5th chord, that's G in C major, adding the 7th, creating what we call the dominant 7th, intensifies that chord's function. It makes it an even stronger resolve back to the tonic, okay, that for various reasons. Mostly, if you understand the harmony, mostly it's to do with having the presence of that tritone there, which resolves really strongly out to the C chord. But for all of the other chords in the diatonic series, there's no change in function at all. The function remains exactly the same. The effect of adding the 7th instead is to change the chord's characters. So the type of sound the chord makes is different, but its function remains the same. Now we can use that change in character to musical effect. It's most obvious on the number 1 chord, C in C major, and the number 4 chord, F in C major. So if we, from a C, we create a C major 7th, it has that very kind of rich, chilled out sound that we associate with genres like jazz. Okay, same on the 4th. There's the regular number 4 chord, and there's the major 7th built off the number 4 chord. Yeah, you know, it's much more, yeah, very kind of chilled out and jazzy. On the minor chords, it's a more subtle effect. Okay, but there's a definite change in character there, and you kind of need to experiment with it to get the hang of it, okay, to really familiarise your ears with the difference between an A minor and an A minor 7 and how that changes the character, the quality of that chord in the context of a progression. Now the 7th chord, the diminished chord in the diatonic major scale, I keep talking about that, it's a bit different, and as I say, I'm going to discuss that separately in a second. Before I do, let's just have a quick think about what happens when we use non-diatonic 7th chords in a major key progression, because things can then get a little bit interesting. To put that in plainer language, what happens if I'm working in the key of C and I take the number 4 chord, the F, okay, which would normally have that major 7th, the diatonic major 7th, but instead give it a minor 7th, just flattening, excuse me, that note at the top of the chord by a semitone. Okay, depending on the context, that could have a couple of effects. Yeah, if we're playing, for example, the blues, there's our number 1 chord, there's our number 4 chord with the flattened 7th, okay? There it's kind of part of the sound, okay? We could quite easily just go back to our number 1 chord. Okay, and that's for a variety of reasons. It's because we would be basing our improvisation around the blues scale, which contains an E flat there in the key of C, as well as an E natural if you wanted one, if you wanted to drop in that from the major or the pentatonic scales. If we were outside of the context of blues or jazz, then dropping in that non-diatonic instability might have other effects. Okay, it might send us off to a change of key. So for example, F7, we've effectively created a dominant seventh chord, is the dominant seventh chord in the key of B flat. So creating a non-diatonic seventh could be a route to a key change. Now, exploring all the implications of that is kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial, but you might like to check out the tutorial I made a few weeks ago on the subject of changing key, which kind of explores these ideas in more detail. The same kind of thing happens if we take a whole chord that is non-diatonic to our key. Again, let's say we're in C major and we drop in an E flat chord and create either an E flat major 7 or an E flat 7. Again, because of the presence of non-diatonic notes, we have quite a severe instability. That might take us back to our C major tonality. Yeah, it might just be a non-diatonic chord that's a temporary change to give us colour in our progression. It might, and it might come back home to the C major, or it might take us out somewhere else entirely. Yeah, if we had an E flat major 7 chord, that might suggest a leap to the key of E flat major. Yeah, where an E flat 7 chord, which is the dominant seventh in the key of A flat major, might suggest that we're changing to the key of A flat major, or even to A flat minor, because it will act as a dominant seventh in that key as well. Again, sit down at the piano, explore, play around with it for yourself. The most unusual form of non-diatonic seventh chord is where you take a minor seventh, like D minor 7, and change the seventh to a major seventh by sharpening it for a D minor plus major 7 chord, and they're quite unusual, they're a bit weird, but you do come across them now and again. Yeah, they might have some functional effect depending on what you're trying to do, but exotic chords like that are generally created for their sound, for their musical effect, rather than for their function. Finally, let's get to grips with this weird diminished chord, okay? The chord that is built on the 7th note of the major scale, okay? So in C major, it is B diminished, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we build it like any other diatonic chord out of thirds, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's 2 minor thirds kind of stuck together. Now, a full diminished 7th chord looks like this. That's B diminished 7th, and as you can see, it's got this note, A flat or G sharp, however you want to think about it, at the top, which is a minor third above the F, and that note does not occur naturally in the C major scale, okay? And any diminished 7th chord, full diminished 7th chord you see in a major progression is non-diatonic. Okay, you will see full diminished 7th chords in major progressions, but usually they're there as they're there for colour, or they're there as passing chords between diatonic chords, or they're there to start a key change, because there are various ways that a diminished 7th can take you off into other keys. What does occur naturally in the major scale is the so-called half diminished 7th chord. There's B half diminished 7th, which is basically the B diminished 7th chord with a third stacked on the top, just at the diatonic scale, the way we build all the other diatonic 7th chords. Sometimes it gets called minor 7 flat 5, because that's B minor 7 and that's B minor 7 with a flat 5th, but I think it's better really to think of it as the half diminished 7th. Again, that half diminished 7th chord has a dominant function in the key of C. You can use it to go back to the dominant chords, the tonic chords rather. Okay, so there is B half diminished 7th to C, that's quite a nice resolve, but you can also use it, because it's just a little bit more unstable than the regular diminished 7th, it has a different kind of quality to its instability, you can use it as the basis for key changes. As I said, and this is a point worth making really clearly, one of the best ways to figure out the various options there is to play around with that chord, and this goes for all of these chords. Play around with them at the piano keyboard and use your ears to figure out what they can do. Yeah, theory is great, but if you try and learn theory in isolation, you'll just go crazy with the complexity. Yeah, just get the basic ideas and take them to the piano keyboard and learn by playing. What Smooth Buddha was saying in his original question, but you know, I've been playing around with these seventh chords on the piano keyboard and they sound a bit strange. Well, Smooth Buddha, you're doing it in exactly the right way. That is the approach to take. Don't try and memorize everything, rather get the idea and then play around with it, okay? Figure out what's cool, what sounds weird, all the rest of it. That way really is the best kind of approach if you want to grasp and internalize what I'm talking about here. Okay, there we go. I hope that was useful. I hope that kind of answered the question. One of the things to remember about seventh chords is although they have similar names, as I hope I've shown you, they tend to be quite different in sound and function and not always that closely related to each other, okay? But as I say, take them to the piano keyboard, play around, see what you can come up with. As usual, I'll just say subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. Check me out on Facebook and Twitter. Check out my Patreon crowdfunding campaign at www.patreon.com/Bill Hilton. And any questions or comments you happen to have, just stick them in the comments thread underneath the video and I will get back to you. Okay, I will see you again very soon.